Everyone, as we have just come through a magnificent weekend to honor the life and legacy of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., it is appropriate for us to continue the legacy in this year. This year being the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, it is important to remember the struggles that led to the passage of the bill. It's probably one of the most important pieces of legislation in our country's history because it preserves freedom and enables people to vote. Great sacrifices were made at the time, even lives were lost. But the bill was passed in August, signed in August 50 years ago. A person who participated in all of that activity at the time as a very young man, he was there in the fight for civil rights and voting rights. He is here with us in the Congress, and we're so honored, is our Assistant Leader, Mr. Jim Clyburn. He has agreed to be the chair of our Democratic Outreach and Engagement Task Force. He will talk to you more about it. I will just say that I'm so grateful to all of the members who have agreed to participate. He will introduce them. I'm so proud of the actions taken by the Congressional Black Caucus. They were in Ferguson this weekend. Perhaps you saw it in the press. We're very proud of how they launched this commemoration of what happened 50 years ago and why it's so important that we pass a civil rights bill now and do all that we can to encourage engagement, to give people a reason to register and a reason to vote. As we gather here, a little bit earlier today, protesters were on the steps of the Capitol. It's 5 years since the terrible decision made by the Supreme Court of Citizens United. But just acknowledging that dreadful decision tells us how important it is for us to make sure that every person who is eligible has the right to vote and that his or her vote is counted as cast. Who better to lead the way for us than our Assistant Leader, former Chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, a long-term advocate for civil and voting rights, our Assistant Leader, Mr. Jim Clyburn. But President Lincoln said, public sentiment is everything. You heard me say this almost every time we meet. And that's why using the inspiration of the 50-year anniversary, using Martin Luther King weekend as a time, Selma at the beginning of March, the 50th anniversary, using all of that inspiration and attraction of people to the issue of voting and what sacrifices were made to expand the right to vote in our country is the way we hope to to persuade the public, to persuade the Republicans that people should have a right to vote, and then they'll vote the way they vote. And that's their free choice, but as long as we all know that they're going to vote, their views will be more taken into consideration. If I just may say, I left, we had the California mayors in there, and we were all comparing notes. I was saying, I was quoting a speech over the weekend when Martin Luther King spoke at the Civic Auditorium in 1956, where he said, legislation is the path, the ballot is the path. You don't ignore this method of legislation. The mayor of Los Angeles was saying, well, the best speech he ever made was at a synagogue in 1956 in Los Angeles. The Northern Californians were saying it was the Stanford speech. Mr. Clyburn will claim the letter from the Birmingham jail. We're all in competition for the most inspirational, and I'm sure others here have their favorite speech, which whether it was about the war in Vietnam or whether it was about health care, or whether it was in India when he went there to talk about nonviolence. This was such an inspirational figure in our country, a monument among presidents on the Mall, a day that he has alone while Washington and Lincoln share a day. So this is something very special to us, this gift of Reverend Martin Luther King and this legislation that he helped led the way to enact, and we want to make sure that legacy is preserved. I think we have time for one more question.